From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Will there or won't there be a government shutdown after Donald Trump blows up the House Republican plan to keep the government funded, and after that same House GOP fails to pass his preferred alternative? Plus, a Georgia State Appeals Court disqualifies Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis from continuing to oversee her criminal litigation against Donald Trump. Welcome to Potomac Watch, a Wall Street Journal podcast. I am your host today, Kim Strassel, here with my amazing colleagues, Mene Ukwe-Barua and Alicia Finley. Let's start with the mess in the House. And I want to be clear, we are taping this in the afternoon on Friday, and things are moving fast. But let's try to sum up where they stood last time I checked in on Washington. House Speaker Mike Johnson was nearing to closing out this Congress with a fairly ugly bill that would have continued to fund the government through March 14th. But also, and in order to get all the votes necessary, including Democratic votes, had been loaded up with disaster dollars, farm dollars, an ethanol mandate, healthcare provisions, China restrictions. Donald Trump threw a bit of a fit over its size, but also over the fact that it lacked a debt ceiling increase, something that nobody had really even been talking about. So last night, Johnson put a slimmed down bill on the floor, plus a debt ceiling provision. It failed miserably. 38 Republicans voted against the bill, as did all but 3 Democrats. Republicans have been meeting all morning, all day. Let's listen to Mike Johnson talking about the state of events.
We have a unified Republican conference. There is a unanimous agreement in the room that we need to move forward. I will not telegraph to you the specific details of that yet because I've got a couple of things I got to wrap up in a few moments upstairs, but I expect that we will be proceeding forward. We will not have a government shutdown, and we will meet our obligations for our farmers who need aid, for the disaster victims all over the country, and for making sure that military and essential services and everyone who relies upon the federal government for a paycheck is paid over the holidays.
So to be clear, if a bill is not passed sometime in the coming hours, the federal government will shut down at midnight. Mene, we are hearing a little bit in Washington about some alternative plans and ideas the Republicans are debating. How confident are you that they will get something over the line? And what is it that are some of their options they're talking about?
Yeah, I would say that it's possible, but not necessarily likely that the House and Senate are going to be able to pass something according to Speaker Johnson's new plan. What he seems to be floating based on the reporting is the idea of splitting up the package into separate bills. So what they originally were aiming to do a couple of days ago was have one big package, which started in theory as a clean continuing resolution, but then had a few other provisions attached, like $100 billion for disaster aid. So this is to aid the recovery to places that were impacted by hurricanes recently. And FEMA, of course, ran out of the money to be able to finance that recovery. They also wanted to add an additional $10 billion for farmers who have had a rough go and want to be able to make up for that. So it's very common for the federal government to provide regular assistance to farmers. And then they added a whole bunch of other provisions that particularly the fiscally conservative members of the House Republican Conference couldn't go for. And that deal fell apart when it was condemned by Elon Musk, first and foremost, but also by President Trump and J.D. Vance. They now want to split up some of those core provisions into separate bills. So the idea is that there's a much broader consensus just for keeping government funded and running, and even a lot of conservative members might be willing to go for that. And then there will be up and down votes on the disaster and farm aid. I think that those might have a good amount of popular support too. But a lot of people really resented being forced to vote on all of it in one giant must-pass package. And so I do think that they're going to get more support for this new approach, but not necessarily majority support. And we won't know probably until it actually comes to the floor.
One more idea that I've also heard floating out there is to put out the slimmed down package. So that slimmed down package had stripped out, for instance, some of the healthcare stuff and this ethanol mandate for E15, but also pull out the debt ceiling portion, which was something that had annoyed a lot of those conservative Republicans who didn't want to go down that path unless there were spending cuts attached to it. So that's another idea that I am hearing. Alicia, it's interesting. Donald Trump, I think adding into all of this is saying saying, well, if we need a shutdown, we'll just have a shutdown. Let's have it now. Let's have it happen during the Biden time still in office, and Democrats will own that. That's not necessarily the view across town. Let's listen to dueling views on who would get the blame for this from both Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, but also Majority Leader Chuck Schumer in the Senate.
The Democrats just voted to shut down the government, even though we had a clean CR, because they didn't want to give the president negotiating leverage during his first term, or during the first year of his new term. And number two, because they would rather shut down the government and fight for global censorship. They've asked for a shutdown.
If Republicans do not work with Democrats in a bipartisan way very soon, the government will shut down at midnight. It's time to go back to the original agreement we had just a few days ago. It's time the House votes on our bipartisan CR. It's the quickest, simplest, and easiest way we can make sure the government stays open while delivering critical emergency aid to the American people.
Alicia, it's one thing for Donald Trump to say, well, Biden's in office, so he'll own this. I'm not quite so sure that's where the blame would fall if this happens. You do have Republicans who look to have had a deal and now are changing course. Where do you see the politics of this falling if we end up going into shutdown tonight?
Well, I think the Republicans are going to get blamed, and that's why Democrats are very happy that this all is happening, because the Republicans control the House. Yes, that they have a very narrow majority, but this bill has got support in the Senate. Biden would no doubt have signed it if the House Republicans passed it, and there was a deal. And then Elon Musk and Donald Trump threw a wrench into the negotiations or the deal by claiming, well, you must raise the debt ceiling, and that this bill is around 1,500 pages. It was way too big. You need a slimmed down version. And you must, without any of the adornments like the pharmacy benefit managers regulations, some export controls with China, and other policy provisions. The problem is you need Democratic votes to pass this bill, in part because Republicans don't have a very narrow majority, and they do not want to go along with another big spending blowout. So as a result, Republicans are kind of dependent on Democratic votes to get this through. Nonetheless, Republicans are the ones who are kind of holding this up in part, and they don't want to upset Donald Trump, and he's now threatening primary challenges against some of them. So I think that the public, even though this is happening under Biden's watch, I think the public is fairly smart. I think they understand that this was not instigated by Democrats in this case, and whatever your views of the spending in Congress and the debt, that this probably was not the best vehicle to try to push for reforms. And the Republicans will have a much stronger hand in the new year when Donald Trump is president. They have larger majorities, at least in the Senate, and then they'll have the whip hand to at least do some of the spending cuts that Elon Musk supposedly wants.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more on the CR mess in Washington. Welcome back. I'm Kim Strassel here with Alicia Finley and Mene Ukwe-Barua. I find it curious that the president-elect and Elon Musk and J.D. Vance are expending so much political capital now, given what you said about how much better of a position that they will be in come January. Mene, I want to pick up on this dynamic that Alicia just mentioned, because it's something that I was wondering when was going to come to the fore. And now here we have it. And that is Donald Trump and the House Freedom Caucus, or the more conservative members of his party. And I would note that one of the reasons Republicans are stuck with this kind of ugly looking bill is House Freedom Caucus members routinely refuse to vote for continuing resolutions on principle. They say they won't do it because they're angry that the regular appropriations process didn't work. I get it. That, by the way, that's largely Chuck Schumer's fault for not doing Senate appropriations. But there was always that. And it meant that Mike Johnson had to go to Democrats to get some help if he had any prayer or shot of getting even his initial bill over the line. But then you had Donald Trump wander into this, and he seemed to think, it almost felt as though, well, he'd throw his weight around and these guys would just back him no matter what he said. He'd just sort of push him into doing it. And the thing about those House Freedom Caucus members is, they're often portrayed in the media as being Trump acolytes, and obviously they are supporters of him. But when you look at it, I think what they like is his willingness to kind of break China. But they're very ideological, and their biggest priority is spending restraint. And that's never been something Donald Trump has cared about a big deal. I mean, funny aspect of this bill was slimmed down in terms of some of its regulatory provisions, but it actually ended up being even a bigger dollar amount by the time he got done with it. I guess the question is, and as Alicia mentioned, this got nasty. Donald Trump actually went online and said he was going to primary Chip Roy, who is one of the ringleaders of the House Freedom Caucus. I wonder where you see this. Is this a little bit of a preview of what is to come in the next year? I mean, there's been so much euphoria among Republicans, but this seems to be more of some of the real splits that could really get in the way of Republicans doing something they want to do next year.
Yeah, I think it's completely fascinating to see the position of the Freedom Caucus right now with regard to funding the government. I think that if you look at these issues on the merits, they do have a strong argument when it comes to the debt ceiling proposal that President Trump parachuted in with a couple of days ago, in the sense that, of course, President Trump would rather have Congress increase the debt ceiling now during President Biden's presidency and not have to own it himself. But they know that if they wait until next year, they'll have the possibility of offsetting that debt ceiling increase with spending cuts, which is going to be impossible for them to do while President Biden is still in the White House and while Democrats control the Senate. And so they know that that kind of provision, increasing the debt ceiling, is one of the opportunities they have to be able to rein in spending and want to hold out for that rather than being marched towards a near-term increase. On the CR, I think you see a different picture in the sense that, again, because President Biden and the Democrats are in power today and government needs to be funded within the next few hours, they should be willing to vote for a relatively clean continuing resolution merely to continue the current funding levels, understand that they don't have the leverage to be able to cut government beyond that right now, and they're only making life hard for Mike Johnson and for themselves politically by holding out against that. But I do think that on the overarching question of how they're going to relate to Trump on a whole bunch of the other priorities that Republicans have, like passing a tax bill, passing a border and energy bill, and things like that, it does show that they're not going to merely be in lockstep with the orders that are coming down from the White House. They do believe that their constituents specifically want them to rein in spending, that they'll be held accountable for that, and they're going to try to use whatever leverage they have to actually affect the direction of policy. So there's much more disagreement among Republicans in Washington than I think it appeared to be between Election Day and this week.
Yeah, it strikes me as a real warning to the incoming Trump administration and Republican leaders that with the narrow majorities they have, those focused on spending reductions really do mean what they say and intend to try to see something come along in that way. What I'm looking for, I'll be really curious to see, is I kind of wonder if this Johnson plan to split up the bills wasn't designed in part to give some of these guys an off-ramp, maybe get right with Trump again. Maybe they'll vote against the disaster aid and farm aid, but go along with the continuing resolution to try to make nice. We'll see. Strikes me as that was done and maybe to allow some of them to get back in Trump's good graces.